Welcome back to Training Kamp. My name is Dan Hartwig. We got Maurice Clarett and, of course, the Sierra Hartwig with us today. What is happening, Maurice?
Everything is happening, right? Here we go. So we're going to jump into the show. We're going to jump into the show, and we are purposely doing this unscripted for a reason, right? And the reason I'm doing is that I'm picking on Dan, and I want like a real reaction from Sierra. And Dan is like the most utterly prepared, structured.
Overly prepared.
Overly prepared. That's his wife, if nobody knew, right? He's overly prepared. So I wanted like a fresh and clean answer. And I have this discussion a lot with a lot of people, right? And it's a couple things, right? And so we always talk about destructive behavior or self-defeating behavior with people, right? And we always talk about like your normal stuff, right? If somebody's on drugs, you can say drugs are self-defeating, right? If somebody drinks alcohol, you can say alcohol is self-defeating. If somebody has multiple women, and these seems to be like the three common topics that people talk about to say, oh, this person destroyed itself from those three
Money,
things.
drugs, or women.
Okay, so
What about guys?
Hold on. I'm about to tell y'all, right? So what happens is I've said to myself that I think that there are more things that people aren't aware of that are self-destructive and self-defeating.
Sure.
So take drugs, alcohol, money, and women off the table, or men, right? And shove them over here as if they didn't exist. What are some things that you think that people may not be aware of that are self-defeating or self-destructive that you've seen? I'll give you my thing. I think procrastination is a big deal. I think lying is another big deal. Or you have
Those are good ones.
You have different levels of lying, right? Or procrastination and lying kind of fit into the same boat. But I want to push it to both of y'all and hear y'all answers, and we go from there.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go because he is dying inside right now trying to prepare mentally.
That's why I pushed to you.
I'm really, really not making this up. He has to prepare for everything. For me, I just kind of like...
Let it go.
Let it go. I think those are really good ones. I would never really think of those, but I would say excuses. And what I mean by that is so many people just make excuses for why they don't want to do things, or why they think they can't, when it's not that they can't, it's just they won't. And so to me, that's the biggest thing I see. Like when people come to me for help, they're just like, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that. And I'm like, it's really not that you can't. Like they say, like, I can't because I don't have like enough time or whatever. Like I have the same amount of hours in a day
that you have.
I work double the amount of hours you do. I'm running around with a child. I have a dog. Like I have all these responsibilities. So it's not that you can't, but it's you just won't. And I think excuses are like the biggest thing I see that people don't really talk about. What about you? What about you, Mr. Hartwig?
Man, I'm thinking of a lot of things.
Well, come on, listen to it. We have time.
Yeah.
I did this on purpose. I just wanted, whatever comes up, comes out.
So what do I think is self-destructive to a lot of people?
Yeah, outside of, so just to specify it, we talk about money, drugs, women, like the core stuff that everybody talks about to say how this person ruined their life. I just want you to address, like, what are some other things that you may have seen that are self-defeating and self-destructive behavior that is not them, that may help the listener to say, oh, I have self-destructive behavior. Just because I don't drink, smoke, or mess around with women doesn't mean that...
Or men.
I said men earlier. I'm sorry.
It's so weird. Why is it just girls who are destructive?
Do you know how awkward it is for Maurice Clarett to be like,
Okay, but I don't know. Okay, I've never just heard somebody refer to it as just women. And so I'm like, wait, why are just women destructive?
We don't want to get canceled by the women who made like this sexist podcast, right? Go ahead.
Outside of lying, outside of excuses, what's self-defeating for a lot of people?
Here we go. You coach, you lead, you have a lot of people who've come across you. There's a lot of people who see your life. There's a lot of people who see like you all's lifestyle. There's a lot of people who say that they want to achieve. let's take the top 3 things off the table, right? She said excuses. I've said drugs. I've said alcohol. I've said women. She said men.
You said lies.
I've said lies. Are there other things that a person just may not be aware of that may be self-destructive or self-defeating that doesn't help them to achieve their goals?
Yeah, I think I think resting on past success. I think resting on
That's a good one.
you know,
Yeah,
I think relying on maybe what you have done versus what you're going to do. I think not thinking big, thinking small. I think losing your hunger is self-defeating. I think losing your drive is self-defeating. I think and all of that I think comes out from pushing yourself. Like if you're not pushing yourself, you're not going to have your drive. You're not going to have your hunger. So when you lose your hunger, you're on the decline. You're always going to be on the decline immediately. I think the other thing that's self-defeating is probably lack of preparation. But
That's a good one. So we didn't set him up to defeat himself, but we're talking about self-defeating behavior. Go ahead.
He is overly prepared for everything in life.
But I think a lot of it comes down to just putting intentional pressure. Intentional pressure. I think that's something that I do to myself. Is I put a lot of intentional pressure on myself, but I think the other thing that it does is also it creates an expectation for other people that it's not fair. Meaning, like one of the things.
Slow down. Go ahead.
I think one of the things
No, you caught my attention. You kind of you were ripping past something I think that would be valuable. For
intentional pressure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know that I do is I put intentional pressure on myself.
Okay.
So whether it be, setting an expectation, right? Because we rise and fall to the level of expectations that we have for ourselves. And sometimes the thing that a lot of people don't do is they don't decide what are the things that they're not going to allow themselves to get away with. What are the things that they're not going to allow themselves to get away with? So one of the examples that I was talking to you about just the other day, we were just having a random conversation, right? I was talking about principles, right? Well, a lot of times, if you're not living your life based on principles, what ends up happening is that you're going to get swayed by all these certain people or circumstances or whatever it is. And part of your strength is going to come not just from deciding what you stand for, it's also deciding what you will not stand for, what you will not tolerate. And so one of the things that I think is going to prevent people from being self-defeating is saying, I have an expectation for myself that I wake up early, that I work out, that I read, that I pour in, that I prepare, that I do this, that I do that. And when you are self-defeating, a lot of times it's because of the fact that you have very low expectations for yourself. That's something that is self-defeating for a lot of people.
Let me ask you this, right? I'm playing like I'm a listener, right? I'm trying to act like I'm a listener, listening to this information. How do you go about developing expectations for yourself? Right, and let me unpack this. Right.
Yeah.
Was there a group of books? This goes to both of
Man,
y'all.
I'm going to tell you exactly how I came up with my. So here's the thing. There's this.
They pass it to you next.
But here's the thing: is that okay? Look, this is the analogy that I give to a lot of people, right? That your core principles are like the anchor to a boat. Boat goes out in the middle of the ocean, right? You don't drop the boat. Over time, what happens to the boat?
Floats.
It floats. Where does it float?
Wherever the water
Wherever
goes.
it wants,
Yeah,
right?
Pretty much.
What could end up happening to that boat? It could get into rough waters. It could get into a storm. It could end up hitting things. It could end up turning over. It could end up capsizing. It could do all these certain things, right? But what I'm telling you is that it's not going to go to where it's intended to go to, or worse yet, it ends up getting into rough waters, which ends up causing more problems.
Life.
Your principles are very much like the anchor to a boat. Drop the damn anchor, watch what ends up happening to the boat. It can only go out so far, right? If somebody came up to you and said, yo, Maurice, let's go rob a bank, it's very easy for you to say, I'm not robbing a bank. Why? Because your principles don't allow you to. It doesn't allow you to go out that far. So the real question is, well, how do I come up with my principles? What I did, and this is, I think, what changed my life years ago, like I'm talking like a decade ago, literally went to Google, typed in core values. Man, I came up with hundreds, but I narrowed them down.
You really did that?
I really did that.
So did you narrow them down, like what aligns with you or who do you want to be? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I don't want to.
I align them in order, right, to ultimately what I want. So the first thing is that I identify was character. And I define character as, are you reliable? Are you dependable? Are you predictable? Are you proactively accountable? Like proactively accountable to me means like, Hey, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. Hey, I want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. Look at every single one of those words: predictable, proactively accountable, dependable, like all of those words that end in ABLE. That means that every single one of us are able to do those things.
So what I'm going to have you all do, because I can kind of keep up with him as he's talking, we're going to make sure Tyler meshes like a good graphic together so you can see it on Instagram. Go ahead.
So
Draw it out.
but my first core value is character, right? And so like when I think about like, you know, are you like reliable? Are you like dependable? That means like, does your word mean anything, or does your word mean nothing, right? Like I believe in like, you know, back in the day where it was a handshake, like actually meant something. Like some people's words are so damn cheap nowadays because of the fact that they say they're going to do shit. And the reason why they don't do shit is because they either forgot, they get lazy, they lack preparation, or whatever it is. So I think one of the things that allows you to have strong character is you have to have an expectation for yourself that you're going to be early, that you're going to be prepared, that you're going to, you know, think through things, right? Yeah. So character, I think, is a big thing. The next thing that I base my principles on is communication. Communication is like, you know, are you quick on communication? Are you urgent? Are you slow to communicate? How do you communicate? Do you work on your communication skills? That's a skill that you actually have to work on in life. If you want to be a better business person, you want to be a better husband, right? Man, you tell me that all the time, right? Stop.
What did she tell you all the time?
But it's true though. She gives me good criticism, right? Like sometimes she's like,
communication?
She's like, you know, you're yelling. I'm like, I'm not yelling. I'm being stern. You know, but you know, the reality is that we all have things that we got to work on. So communication is one of the other core values. I pride myself on making sure that, and I fail at it. But you know,
we all do.
But you know what? You're more cognizant of recognizing things that you fail at when you care about it.
Yes.
The third core value that I have is focus and discipline. I put those two together. Focus and discipline, because you can accomplish a lot of things in your life if you're focused and if you're disciplined. We can have a whole, you know, session on focus and discipline. But here's my rule of thumb on focus, right? Your focus funds your future. Your focus funds your future. So what I mean by that is that when you have really big focus, you're going to fund a really good future. When you have very little focus, you're going to fund a really little pathetic future. So get focused. And the last one is growth. I think growth is a requirement for life. Growth is something that you have to have in business. It's something that you have to have personally. It's something that you have to have in your relationship. And if you're not consciously trying to grow in life, what ends up happening is that you're going to die. And sometimes people go through life dead, dying, right? And so
every day.
The opposite of growth is life. So, but here's the other thing though too, is that I didn't just say those just randomly. They go in order. They go in order. Because to me, growth doesn't mean anything unless it was done consistently. So it's got to be done with focus. It's got to be done with discipline. I don't want it to be an accident. So I don't want to fall off just because I have a little bit of success. The other thing is too, is that focus and discipline doesn't mean anything if I'm doing it without other people communicating in the process. But character is the most important thing.
That's where it starts.
That's where it starts.
I think just even listening to you, I was saying to myself, like, legitimately, Tyler, he's the cameraman. He has the graphics. He can kind of put this together. I think like if somebody literally just trying to say, where do I start? I think you just kind of illustrate it.
You got to know what you stand for. You got to decide, you know, who do you want to become?
But so I tell you like this. Yesterday, I spoke to a bunch of kids at Marshall, right? Marshall football team. And throughout the process, a lot of their questions really boiled down to, how do I find myself?
Yeah.
And how do I represent something? And as you were talking, I'm hearing like a system that you can give to somebody and say, hey, bro, this is a path that you can follow. Like if I gave them advice, I would give them books I read, and I would have discussions around books, right? I've never chronologically, if that's the appropriate word for it, I've never illustrated just a system on how you can do it. You know, you stack character, you talk about focus and discipline. But even as you were talking, I was like, oh, okay, I see. But I can, based upon what you told me, I can see how you live your life being next door to me. You know what I'm saying? It lines up. You know what I'm saying?
It does. I never knew he had that system. Like, that's bizarre. It's the DH system, apparently.
It's the DH system, right? So I guess it goes to you. How do you develop your expectations for yourself?
I didn't Google values, and like, how do I go after that?
Look, here's the other thing that I would say though, right? Is I think that you can decide by not just being inspired by other people, but how many of us learn what not to do based on what we see other people do, of how they treat people, of how they talk to other people. And so you can literally, like, you can frame your life being like, man, I don't want to grow up and be like that. There's a story about two sons, right? And I know I've shared this story before with some people, but there's a story of two sons. One ends up becoming a doctor, the other one ends up going to prison. Right, and so an interview is done with both doctors, or
I've been to
both
prison.
an interview is done. An interview.
I can't.
Okay, an interview is.
So this might not be the best example.
No. It is no. Listen,
he's a rare breed.
Listen. So the story is about a son that is a doctor and a son that went to prison. They interview both sons, and they say to the son that went to prison, and they say, "Let me ask you a question. How is it that you ended up in prison?" And he said, well, it was very easy. He said, my father was an alcoholic. He used to beat my mother. He used to curse around us all the time. And he always, used to, just, beat us up all the time. Like, oh, that makes sense. They go to the doctor and they said, let me ask you a question. How is it that your brother ended up in prison and you ended up becoming a doctor? And he said, well, it was very easy. My father was an alcoholic. He always used to beat up my mother, right? He always used to beat us up and always used to curse all the time. And so the moral of the story is that, just because of the fact that, something happened to you in your life, you don't have to make that the reason why you can't accomplish something. You can make that the very reason for why you do break out, why you do break through. And so whatever excuse that you're making, just ask yourself a very simple question. Is that helping you or is that hurting you?
I think we go back to the other episode, or earlier episode, where she talked about excuses. And it all comes down to what you accept, I don't know if you can end the show talking about your expectations, because I want them to hear from you all. I want them to hear from you, and you can end the show.
One thing that I do, and it's kind of like the opposite of what most people, is anything that makes me feel uncomfortable, I try to intentionally do that because I know that it will make me better. Because you can't grow unless there's some sort of resistance. So like when I find myself, I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Even like in social situations, I used to be like this huge like social butterfly, and it's not that I'm not now, but sometimes like going out to like big parties or things like that, I'm like, oh, I really like, that's not my vibe anymore, but I'm like, I don't want to do it, so I'm going to force myself to do it. I'm going to get out of my comfort zone. I think that helps me develop my expectations, because I know if something's going to challenge me, it's just going to in some way make me bigger and better. So I kind of like go off of that. I mean, it can apply to really anything like in your life. It was like, remember how I had this like reunion, and I'm like, I have zero desire to go to it. I have zero desire to drive all these hours back to Toledo, but I was like, I don't want to do it. So you know what? I'm going to force myself to do it. And I remember like getting some anxiety before going into it. And I'm like this is how I can overcome like that fear, the anxiety and things like that. The only way to get better is just to do it. So anything uncomfortable that makes me uncomfortable, I just intentionally do. And like somehow, and the next time like I try to do it, it's way more comfortable.
Got you. Well, we're going to wrap up the Training Kamp show. It was a lot said. We started off talking about other self-defeating behaviors that people have, and Dan definitely unpacked something for you all. He gave a whole system of how you can get your life together, get back on track, and we're going to try our best to have Tyler put it in like visual format to make it easy for people to see.
The DH system. The
DH system. And if you want to basically write it down and study it, it's I thought it was very helpful. But follow us on with the Champ program on IG. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Training Kamp with a K. Check us out every week. Myself, Dan, and Sierra Hartwig, the greatest show on earth.